We've just been talking about very materialistic issues, politics, conflict, the economics of pastoral systems. But there's another aspect to my work I wanted to mention, which is really predicated on an understanding of cultural systems. I mentioned that at the beginning of our discussions. And that brings us into the field of symbols. One thing at Chicago that was a continuing sort of subterranean debate, you might say, was between David Schneider's concept of symbols and Victor Turner's concept of symbols. And Victor Turner, of course, was really the mentor of people who wanted to work on ritual in Africa. And he was the master and did some absolutely wonderful work in that field. And his observations were really predicated on understanding the field, understanding the perspectives of people, rather than strictly theoretical. His theoretical observations arose out of his ethnographic experience. And one aspect was ritual symbols, where he looked very carefully at the particular objects that people used, or the particular ideas that they had in pursuing ritual. And in that, he was truly a genius. Vic Turner had taught a course which was famous. It was a seminar course, and it was held at his house. So on a particular Tuesday night, people would come over, and it would run from, I think it was 6:30 to 9:30. There would be somebody who was assigned to make a presentation based on their work. So it was a very active research seminar. They would present, and then they would break off, and the beer would come out. And this, I think, was Vic's contribution. He certainly enjoyed the beers that he was having. And then we would, after being sort of relaxing in that mode, we would come back to discussion and analysis back and forth. It was a wonderful context in which to learn and to share ideas. Let me mention one other event, which was actually quite dramatic. Peter Brook brought a production to the University of Chicago that I think had gone elsewhere as well. It was a dramatic production. It was based on the Eek, the book by Colin Turnbull, The Mountain People, was on the Eek. And of course, I think people generally might know that this was a very, very critical look at the Eek, who were basically being described as people who were starving, but were turning into essentially inhuman individuals who were snatching food from one another and withholding food, etc. At the same time, it was clear that the Colin Turnbull and his partner were withholding themselves from helping the Eek. And they were doing so on what I feel is a very spurious reason for the objectivity of anthropological science. I think today that argument would be ludicrous, and I guess it was just barely acceptable as an argument that he would present, because basically he was himself withholding food from the Eek. Well, the drama went on, and at a certain point, Vic's wife, Edie, stood up in the audience and began to shout as a mode of interruption. "Feed the Eek! Feed the Eek!" And it would appear that they had had a dinner party before, and this had been a point of discussion, and it arose. And then various black members of the community began to also shout similar things. And I'm sort of used to watching drama, and the drama's there, and we're here. But this is an aspect of participation which was quite disruptive, but very educational. It really, in some ways, went to the heart of the matter. Vic himself just absented himself. He left because I think he realized that Edie was somebody who couldn't be controlled. But maybe, in some sense, maybe it was good that she wasn't controlled, because she was making a very, very important humanitarian point, that to carry out work among a group that's going through starvation and not contribute food and not try to be a source of alleviation was intolerable. So the approach that I developed in my studies with Victor Turner, look very carefully at the symbols, see what people, how they interpret them, see whether they involve meanings that are contrastive as opposed to simply here is the meaning. Very often, meaning depends on context. This is certainly something that I learned from another scholar there, Michael Silverstein, who is an anthropological linguist who is very interested in how language is used. He was a student of Jacobson's, and it wasn't language as a structured system, it's language as a tool for engaging in social life. Essentially, it's a means of communication, but also a means of action. And Vic certainly saw his symbols in that same way. So from the perspective, I guess I carried into the field an interest in systems and also practices with regard to ritual analysis. And one area that I took on to understand was the libones of the Maasai. And I mentioned earlier that the libones had a number of different powers. It was powers that they very definitely thought flowed through the genealogical line. In short, it's something you inherited because so-and-so was your father. And that was the power of an ibon, which is the power of foresight, being able to see things that are happening at a distance, see things that happened in the past, see things that will happen in the future. So that was a power or a skill that was enhanced through liquor. So one thing that if you came to see a libone, you were expected to bring along some liquor, and that would facilitate the entire operation. So and I'll never forget, I went and lived for quite a while with one of the libone families. And I remember him, and I recorded it all, and I have it all written down. It was singing away because he had gotten himself drunk, and he was doing an ibone and seeing various things in the future. But another power was the power of divination. And these two powers were distinct. They were different ways of getting at an understanding of human affairs. And the system of divination was carried out with gourds filled with objects. So you'd have a gourd would be about like that. I've got some downstairs. And they would be filled with little pebbles, but there would also be other little objects, some manufactured coming through the modern system. There may be a small shot from a gun, or there might be some plastic thing, all kinds of things. So he had this, and he would shake it. And I remember being there and asking him to show me how it worked. And he said, okay, you may have a question. And you have to whisper the question into the gourd. So I came and I whispered, and I think I said, well, how are the folks back home? Something like that. How is my father? And so then he shook it out, and he looked there, and he went here, and he said, oh, I see some activity is going on in your home back in America? Let's see. Oh, your father's okay. There's no problem on the side of your father. What is your sister up to? And various things, very, very cleverly done, extremely, insightful, but of course in a way that would seem to be inevitably insightful. It's, so they had, essentially, this seemed to be a technology which you could learn. I tried, I have elaborate notes on everything. I'm not sure I cracked the code as such. But it's something that you would sit, if you're the son of a Libon, you would sit with him and go over it. And rather than it being secret knowledge, it seemed to be public knowledge. Because sometimes you would sit there and he would be arranging that, and somebody would reach in and they'd put it here or there. And, I know how the system works. Because he'd been, there a lot. So I would contrast an Ibon, which was an inbred or an inherent ability to see, and with divination, which seemed to be a technology that is learned, and whether the power of his gourd was such that it was able to give results, but other people's couldn't, I'm not sure. The divination was used in all kinds of different ways. And the master Libons, because it's a whole family, the master Libons were consulted by the age-set leaders who are trying to decide when should we have our great ceremony, where should our great ceremony be held, who should be named for the main ritual leadership positions, etc. And so they would come and they would stay for a week in the Libon's village and discuss all kinds of things with him. And then they would sit and he would do the divination in order to say, you should do the ritual a month after the next rains. And you should do it in a time that's approaching the full moon. And seek for your leaders among those whose families are the most reputable, etc. And the role of the person to do that was extremely important. The age set itself had to bring 49 cows to the Libon, which is a lot. So they gathered them, they basically brought them together from across the entire section, and then they gave the 49 cows, either that moment or over time. And so you could see that by virtue of him being seen as the necessary person kicking off and making happen the great ritual, and the accumulation of livestock over time, he was a very rich man. Now, the Libon was, because of the skills, was also somebody who would be consulted by ordinary people. Somebody whose wife, had a problem. So they would go to the Libon and stay there. They would basically move in. It was like a hospital. There were always different people who were staying there because they had problems of one sort or another. And they would be there and they would come and he would do divination and find out, okay, is your problem a problem of reproduction? Is it a problem of digestion, etc.? And find that out. And then what should be done? And was it a problem of cursing? Have you been cursed? And if so, what can be done to relieve you of the curse? Do we know? Can we find out who was the person who cursed you or protect you against it? And so he was the last of his skills. He was a bit of an herbalist, and not an herbalist like putting medicines in and giving you a potion to drink. There was a little bit of that. but that would be another person. But somebody who dealt in magical powders. So there would be a grinding up of things, and metals would be an important thing, and various types of particular herbs, et cetera, and they put them into a packet, which would be sewn into a leather packet about like that. And you wear it around your neck, and that would give you protection against being cursed. Another aspect of protection was to tie a village. And you would tie a village, ayin, by putting particular strings that had particular, what they call entasim, which would be a ritual medicine, along it. And you would go around the entire village. And then nothing negative could come into the village, no curses could come into the village, etc. And so tying a village was a very important thing. And he would come and when they had the ritual village with, hundreds of people and thousands of visitors, he would tie it. So there'd be everything would be blessed, nothing would be bad. And then the final act that I would mention is by ringing. And I found this the most extraordinary thing. At sunset, or just before, a little girl who was a virgin, pure, little girl would walk all the way around the Libones village, ringing a bell, ringing with ringing with the left hand. So she's going clockwise around, ringing with the left hand. And the point here is that all evil was being taken from the village, all resentments, potentially problems, coming out and being dispersed through the sound. I find that a fascinating idea, the mixture. I've never actually published on this, but the mixture of sound, the sound as a medium for transmitting force, basically. So that was, the Libones were of immense importance. In one area, I mentioned the process of adjudicating group ranches and then subdivision. One area has always refused to go through any kind of adjudication of their land. Just refused. And it still is there as a body of what they call trust land. Basically, the government holds the right over that land, and it's the area where the Libones predominate. And they've always said, no, we won't accept it. No, no, no. I'm going to send a doctoral student up there in the next year because I have some reason to believe that this is now the Libones' influence, given modernization and Christianity, the spread of evangelical beliefs, has reduced the power of the Libone. And now I think this is going to happen. The land, it can't be held back. There are too many people who want their piece of land. So this will be an interesting, and let's look at it as a big question mark. Let's see what happens next. So those are two dimensions of symbolic analysis. I've talked a little bit about Victor Turner and about the role of the Libone. One aspect of traditional views of pastoralism is the special role of livestock, and the belief that people who are pastoralists basically love their livestock and they don't treat them as economic objects. And in my discussion in the past, I've mentioned that of course they do treat them as economic objects. They're quite in command of the full empirical range of issues regarding animal care and value, etc. That doesn't mean that there isn't a strong cultural dimension to livestock. The comparison I like to make is to, North America is the land of the cars, right? Who doesn't have a car? Everybody has a car. And we chain the genesis of difference. Each year there are new models that come out. And we would never say that because we love having a particular model car or a particular color, and there are all these cultural aspects. And, a young person growing up is so proud to have their car. We would never say that the car is not an economic object. Of course it is. So the mix of human beings are very able to mix culture and economic value. So you have the role of livestock in pastoral societies is very very central. To think of them as an object of culture, I've taken a number of different perspectives on that. One is simply seeing them as an appendage of human society, which they are. Essentially, a cow is a metonym of human society. It's part and parcel of what they do. It's you can't say there's a pastoralist, but livestock don't play a role. They are within the system of what it means to be a pastoralist. It doesn't mean there aren't metaphorical dimensions, because of course pastoralists tend to look to different types of animals as exemplary of being a brave young man or being a productive woman or whatever. They have all of that in their repertoire. But there are two areas where animals are seen as great analogs of human society, where they're separate and they are, in some sense, able to be the repository of ideas people have about human society. And one I would mention is birds. So you have, there's a whole, what I've called an ornithorium about birds. So they have many ideas about the great birds like the owl and the crow, the nightjar, who play particular roles in the bird society, which are exemplary of roles that are played by human beings. You find the owl is represents the light moon, wisdom, and there's another that represents clairvoyance, etc. So you have the world of birds that are distinctive and are receive names, and then small, colorful birds are really representative of the Moran. And the young initiates come up, and their job for a while is to kill young birds. So they go around with a bow and arrow, but with a block on the end, and they're trying to work out their prowess by killing birds. And then they mount them on a really colorful and beautiful headdress. So it's like something about that. They wear it on their heads. They go around in a black outfit. They're not allowed to wash. So they have a black outfit, and they have hair that is not cut during that whole period. And then they mount this rack of colorful birds. So in effect, the colorful birds are exemplary of the role that they're moving into. So that's birds. The Maasai have a very elaborate system of fables having to do with animals. And some of these we would be familiar with because, of course, they're Pan-African, and they came across the Atlantic during the slave trade. So we all know Brer Rabbit and these sorts of stories. Well, the Maasai have a whole elaborate set of tales about the different animals. And there usually is cow as one very important, stable, but not very smart individual. And then you have your trickster, you've got the rabbit, And then you have, I'm trying to think back to the different roles, but you can basically see them arrayed across the different personality characteristics that can be manifested by in human society. And the fact that they are looking at human predicaments in terms of the interactions that go on within the animal world, I think is marvelous. And you can go through the fables, and you can pick up on all these different ways that the Maasai have basically invested themselves in creating an alternative world where human problems are posed, conundrums addressed, and problems solved.